Hi, welcome to The Big Twist, a podcast where we talk with other creatives about the big plot twists that have shaped their creative lives.
We are so excited today to have our guest here with us, Deniese Davis. Thank you so much for being here. Deniese is Issa Rae's former producing partner. They produced Awkward Black Girl, Insecure, all the way up to this year's One of Them Days. And I say former, but you're still working together, right? You're still partners. Yes. Thank you so much for being here. Anything else you want to...
No, thank you for having me. I am pro-creative all day, so I'm just excited to chat with you both, and really appreciate you for having me in, so thank you.
We're so excited to have you
here. We're so excited to have you here. We would love to dive right into the transition between producing a web series and producing an HBO Max show. Can you talk to us about that journey and how that came about?
How much time do we have? No. I guess to talk about the transition, I must talk about maybe where I was personally at that time too, because I moved to LA to attend the American Film Institute, where I got my MFA in producing, which is hilarious because I'm always like, what do you do with that? But I learned about producing in all ways. And what it did is it empowered me to step out on my own right after I graduated. And so instead of becoming an assistant, I just said, I'm going to freelance produce. And digital was exploding at that time. And so when I jumped into the space, I just became a freelance producer. And I was doing a lot of different web series, a lot of digital content, but then music videos and shorts and all these things. And so I start with that because it was about 2.5, 3 years of working with Issa on a lot of things while also cutting my teeth in production in general as a producer. And what I think I learned when the pilot was greenlit at HBO, this was Insecure, immediately during pre-production, it was so obvious that I was like, oh, I know this. I think there's this like huge imposter syndrome we can have because it feels like it's a bigger set and there's much more money, there's much more people. But slowly and pretty quickly, slowly but quickly, I saw that the instincts and the way in which we approach being storytellers is the same, except it's just on this elevated level. So I almost say I had to just learn like the politics, right? You're like, okay, here's we do a pass for the producers, and then we do a pass for the studio, and then we go back and do another producer's pass, and and figuring out the bigger collaborative nature is really key. But functionality wise, like set is how a set runs, right? That doesn't change, and the way in which we start our day doesn't change, and how we get through our day doesn't change. The problems we face are the same problems you might face on a $5,000 set versus, a few $1 million. But I think the biggest jump is learning how to collaborate in a bigger environment and honestly just seeing how that process is supposed to work. And once you understand the process, you're like, game on. Like it's not that, it's actually not that scary.
And paradoxically, at least it seems to me, I've directed a crew of maybe 100 people was the biggest that I ever did, a short film in Italy. And I've also I recently directed a short film where my crew size was 4 people, including me, and then the 3 actors. And I think I found it more difficult to have to wear like 5 to 7 different hats on that smaller set, right? Than when you have all the resources on that bigger set. So paradoxically, sometimes it can actually get easier if you have more resources. Because I do want to talk about how you made such a wonderful web series with what I imagine was a small budget, right? Like you probably had to pull a lot of favors.
Yes. Well, but what you're speaking of, I think is great because I see it as such an asset, right? Because what it's doing is introducing you to the roles in which everyone plays. And you kind of end up having so much more respect when you finally have people to do those one jobs that you did, right? Like I used to shop for craft services at Costco. And now when you hire a craft service person whose job that is, you understand what their responsibility is in a different way that really makes you, I think, pay attention to them and include them. And I very much fondly look back at those days where I had to do it all because it really did make me, I think, a better producer for the bigger sets. But I think with Awkward Black Girl in particular, I joined I'd say 3 or 4 episodes into the second season. Issa put up a job online. She was looking for a producer for a line producer for a web series, and it was paid. And I just saw the job posting and was like, great. And I submitted my resume, and that's how we actually met.
That's how you met.
Right place, right time. But the origin story is that, she had already completed season 1, which she started with just a friend who had never held a camera before, and she told her where to point, and it's the stop sign episode, and that's her other friend from college who's driving the other car, Andrew. And so she shoots this and posts it online, and it goes viral, and she's like, oh, I guess I'll do some more. And so by the third or fourth episode, she ended up having friends who all wanted to come and help her, who had different, they were in different film schools, et cetera. And so that's when they started putting together a loose team of sorts. And then they did a Kickstarter. And so that Kickstarter is what funded the entirety of the first season. I think they went to raise 35, and I think ended up raising 55 just from the fan donations. And so that's how the first season was funded, right? And then in the second season, Pharrell Williams had a YouTube channel called I Am Mother that was funded from YouTube. And so he actually gave Issa financing to keep the second season on YouTube. And so when I came in, now you went from a Kickstarter first season of 55 to, 2-3 times that for a second season. And speaking of your experience, I think what happened is like you're doing things very scrappy and just spending money however you can. And then now you're like, oh, we have a set budget. And so now we have to pay attention to the dollars we're spending and how. So then that way we can ensure that this money is going to last however many episodes we want, right? And so when I came in, everything was kind of dialed up a little bit, but I very much stepped in and was like, we should be spending a little bit more on locations, or we should, and just trying to siphon the money the best way we could, especially I think to elevate where it was like, can we film? I remember an episode where it was like, we need a restaurant. I don't know. Can we afford to film in a restaurant? And I made a bunch of calls to just any restaurants in LA to be like, hey, we're doing a web series. This is, the views we get. We'd love to film. And we would always end up finding someone who was willing to assist us for very little money.
That's
and so
amazing.
I just have this belief from that time of just like, you can do anything with what you have. It's just about how resourceful are you going to be, right? How much are you going to actually do the work? Because ultimately, as a producer, someone has to actually figure it out. Like someone's going to have to say, okay, this is how we'll do it. And I'm really grateful because I think you can see the elevation in the production value for sure. I always tell people watch the first episode and then I make them watch an episode of the second season, and you could see between the first season and the second season how it continued to evolve.
And how did that lead to getting Insecure greenlit?
Yeah,
so we may talk about that a little.
Yeah, so when Issa and I met in the summer of 2012, she had just got representation, and she actually first developed a show with Shonda Rhimes. And so that was in development for about 6 months. And so we thought that was going to be the show that would get greenlit. And it didn't get picked up to pilot that next year. But then HBO called and said, hey, we heard you're available. And she went in and pitched in the room in a general meeting what became the origin of Insecure. And so she ended up developing that pilot for the next 2 years with Larry Wilmore. And I'm still kind of in the background. We're still doing the web series and we're doing skits, and like we did so much YouTube videos. We even did our own scripted podcast at one point. Like we were just like, having,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, just really, I think especially in those days, just exploring, right? Just being creative and not having a lot of restrictions. A little bit of money, but not a lot of restrictions. And so that was all great. And then in the summer of 2015, Issa called and was like, hey, they're greenlighting this to pilot. And it's like what you hope for. And in my heart, I always knew like there's no way they wouldn't at least try it, because I just knew how great her voice was and how much the story needed to be told. And so when they greenlit to pilot, she essentially opened the door and said, hey, I want Deniese to join me on this. And so I was one of the producers alongside her and Melina Matsoukas and Prentice Penny, who was there for the 8 weeks we spent on doing this pilot, which, they don't really do anymore. They're kind of bringing it back, but they don't really do it anymore. And so you have these 8 weeks and you're just like, we'll just make the best episode we can. And then you turn it in and then you're just like, we'll see. And I think we got picked up within a week. And we were told it was like one of the fastest pickups.
Yeah, that's crazy.
No, it was insane.
That's amazing. I don't know why I heard that before. But
even more insane, 6 months later, we were back on set for season 1, like to finish the rest of the season. And it was just like, we're doing this.
That's very fast.
We're doing this. Yeah. And what's ironic is the show premiered in the fall of 2016. during like President Obama's like last days of his administration. And so I always look back at that time and was like, God, it was such a transition moment of like for this country, but I think for Hollywood and for what stories were on the screen, especially now, you know, honestly, 10 years later since we did the pilot, and seeing how much we've progressed, but then in some ways how much we've regressed. And you're like, wait a second, did we just go backwards? Like things were like looking so positive and so upwards in terms of whose stories were being told and what was on television at that time. And now I just feel like, you know, I've questioned, I'm like, would a show like Insecure get greenlit right now? Like, I don't know. It's really hard to discern just because of, I think, where we were coming out of that prosperity period at that time and just feeling so hopeful around what was happening.
I've been rewatching it since to prepare for this interview. And one thing that struck me, I was watching episode 1 of season 2, was they're talking about the term woke. And I just, in the context that they're talking about it, it's not a dirty term. Like between when that episode aired and now, it's like there's so many things that no longer align with our reality, right?
I mean, it's not a dirty term.
No,
let's be clear
it just became weaponized.
It became weaponized.
Weaponized.
That's what I mean by it. It's like, you know, it's like, you know, there's so many people that are against woke culture, right? And so, but back then it wasn't the case at all, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that there's something to be said about how it's so topical even now, in spite of all of the quote unquote, there hasn't been, I guess for me, it's like the issue of like, has there really been progress, right? Like there's that episode where Molly is struggling to bond with her white boss, right? And the disconnect, right? And it's just like her trying to fit in with the good old boys club, right? It's like, as a Mexican woman, like I can relate to that, right? I think that it's still very apropos.
Yeah, no, I would fully agree with that. And it's so funny, like I think life, life and especially storytelling, like everything's so cyclical in nature sometimes. And so I've been actually, as depressing as this year has been, I've been excited though and more optimistic because I do feel like a lot of the seeds we planted and some of the subject matters and themes and all of that will come back around in other ways and manifest themselves in other shows and kind of paint a portrait of like, where are we now talking about those things, right? Because so much of what we do, you know, reflects our real life experiences. And I don't think that has gone away yet. And sometimes I love to watch shows and movies from like, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And you're just like, wow, like the things that were taboo then, like they probably couldn't even imagine the world we live in, right? And so you see, I think this thin line of like, okay, we once again we're like 2 steps forward, but then like 1 step back. And so I'd be really curious about like just the representation of those kind of storylines just in the next decade, even once we get past this administration. What is this?
Agreed.
Like?
Well, and you even bringing up that Insecure premiered at the beginning of this administration the first time. Like I just forgot. You know, it's been a while. It's not that I forgot, but I just hadn't put that together. And so that really hit me of like, oh wow, that show was premiering as this transition was happening. And you bringing up woke in that, I also, it just all made me wonder like how much, you were saying it wasn't weaponized then, it wasn't a weaponized term then, but how much was it in the lexicon and how much did Insecure bring these things in, right? And start us having these conversations and start us talking about these things, because that's what drew me in. Like this show was so revolutionary.
It was ahead of its time
in so many ways, and it just like it blew my mind. Sorry, I just want to fangirl out for a minute and tell you how excited I am that you all brought this to the screen.
I think what the writers and the producers did so well was always finding the cultural relevance in the storytelling, right? And and whenever we sat down to map out the next season, it was always talking about like, well, what are our personal experiences, but also what's happening in the world now, right? And not being afraid to bring that mainstream, I think, because in some ways I'm like, woke was a thing. It had been a thing for a couple years at that time, right? But to your point, a lot of shows hadn't actually brought it out into the surface. And so when you do that, I think it allows space to have a larger conversation when you're able to bring subject matters mainstream. And I mean, you can see it even now. I think I saw a headline in an article that was like, we're in the age of the, what do they call it? Like the stoner dads. And they had like images of the guy from Nobody Wants This, the brother, to Leonardo DiCaprio in One Battle After Another, to like another thing. And they had these 3 images. And I was like, oh man, are we there? I guess we're there. Millennials, dads are the stoners now. They're hitting their 40s. So, but you realize again that representation and that cultural relevance where until someone like draws it out and then you realize, oh, the representation's been there in the last 1 or 2 years, but no one's actually called it out specifically yet.
And that's such a great
one of the reasons that I found it so refreshing was, I grew up in Mexico and then I came to the US. And when I was in Mexico, I would watch 90210. And then when I came to the US, I would watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I would watch these shows where it was like primarily a white cast. And then I would be like, how come I don't have blue eyes and blonde hair? Like I want to look like Sarah Michelle Gellar, right? And having Insecure come out and really show a totally different side to LA than 90210, right? I think I found it so refreshing, right? Like these are places that I've gone to time and time again. We're recording this podcast in Inglewood. Yeah, a lot of the show takes place in Inglewood. Yep. So I don't know if you can speak a little bit more about the intentionality behind that and how place plays a role in the show. Yeah,
I mean, we treated our location, our setting like a character, right? And I think what I was always very proud of, especially coming from Issa and Prentice, is that they, from the beginning, from the pilot, always wanted to be authentic and grounded in terms of how we were showcasing where these people lived. And, Issa grew up in Inglewood, so she was, and so did Prentice. And so they were like, I know this world, right? It's not what something like Boys in the Hood and South Central is always like, or Friday, like, those culture, those neighborhoods do exist in those ways, or at least at those times. But, let's show another side to it because not everyone grows up like that. And so I think being able to mesh the two, and, we fought really hard, at least initially from the pilot in the first season when we were still finding the footing to what the show was. I think we had crew members who were like, yeah, but the house can be in Pasadena. It's called Movie Magic. And we were like, no, it cannot be in Pasadena. And here's why. Because you may think we're, out to just tell if we tell the audience that this is where we are, they'll go along with it. But we're here to actually represent this neighborhood authentically. And so we're not going to go to Pasadena because the show doesn't take place in Pasadena, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you see that with the intentional choices we made and what locations we were shooting at. And a lot of that was scripted. They were writing some of these places into the show. Like I remember when we were introducing Worldwide Tacos, when Issa and Nathan would meet and they're waiting the 2 hours for tacos. That's a real place in the writer's room. They actually would order from Worldwide Tacos while they were writing the episode. So everyone understood like how to like bring it into the story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so it's like a lot of this was thought through and that much ahead. And then, there were times where we didn't get to shoot at every location we scripted and we were able to pivot. But even when we pivoted, it was still very much like, how do we keep this in our world?
That's incredible. I love along the lines of those intentionality. I know we will talk about more because you have a lot. I'm sure there's so much more to your experience than Insecure, but I'm just like so obsessed with the show. I'm wondering what the intentionality was and how much was behind. So much of what I loved about the show is that it felt like it started as this exploration of Issa's experiences, Issa D, the character, of like her work and her life and her love life and her friendships. But then it evolved into this just like beautiful love story between these two best friends. And for me, it so much just became about Issa and Molly and their relationship. And that was mind blowing to me because again, you don't see that. Yeah. That very much represented. And it was one of my favorite things. And so I'm so curious about the evolution of that beautiful journey over 5 seasons. Was that very intentional? Did it just come out of the producers' relationships or just came out? Like I'm so curious.
I'd say it's twofold. On one hand, it was intentional where I think by the time we did the Insecure documentary at the end of the last season, I think Prentice might have said something which was like, the real love story of our show was always Issa and Molly. You know what I mean? That was our love story. It's like their friendship, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and you could see that from the pilot and from what we set up, whether it was Broken Pussy and just like introducing them, right? And I always think about how Issa even went in and, she's talked about this before, which is Insecure had a slightly different concept initially in terms of what she was developing and writing, and it just wasn't working. And then one day in a meeting with the HBO execs, they were just asking her about her days, and she started joking about her real best friend, and like was talking about their texts and all this stuff. And Casey Bloys was like, that's the show that we're gonna write. And so she went back and put everything into her life and back into the show, but specifically looked at her friendships and was like, okay, how do I write a show that me and my friends would watch? And so that's kind of where I think the nugget of Issa and Molly really started, right? It's like, you have to keep that in mind, and that it wasn't about that at first, but then once they figured out like that was the secret sauce, it stayed, I think, interwoven in every season. You couldn't really stray from that once you defined like this is what the show is going to be actually about. And one of my favorite things was them in every season knowing that we were inevitably going to get to a season where Issa and Molly would have a falling out, right? And then season 4, which premiered in the summer of 2020, which we never saw coming, but also did wonders for that season in our show. I think it's like very much the crown jewel of each season, and everyone's strapped at home. And so I think to watch that friendship, I think, disintegrate in that season, like people felt it, right?
Brutal.
Because we've all lost friends, and we've all
Yeah.
had those like, you know, I think everyone could relate to that in some way. And that to me was really what is on top, I think, about doing a show when it comes to just exploring the friendship themes.
And it's all the more brutal having seen how great of a friendship it was through season after season, right?
Yeah.
It's like I have in my mind the scene in which Molly specifically goes to an office building in order to find out what's going on with Lawrence, if Lawrence is going to take her back or not. And she's been circling this like park until Lawrence notices her. And so she took time off of work to go find out if Lawrence was going to take Issa back, like in the middle of her workday as a lawyer. Like, that's a really good friend right there.
Yeah, no, it's so true. It's like the things, like how far we'll go to defend our friend and be there for them and support them, right? Which is why I thought it was interesting to explore that inflection point in our friendships, which is like, okay, you're both growing, but are you both growing in the same direction, like a relationship? And are you going to fight for your friendship? How do you evolve and still keep that intact?
Well, and you just don't see that much. I still think, I mean, there's other shows that try to show it, but I just that being the central theme was not something I had seen in such a wonderful mainstream show, and I love it.
Yeah, no, same.
And the other friendships as well. It's like they're all so nuanced and interesting.
Yeah, you had the larger cast, and then you have a lot of fun. And like that's what I enjoy, because I think even within larger friendship groups, there's always one or two that are a lot closer than the others. You know what I mean? And it just is how I guess we gravitate towards our friends. And so I always love that too, is that it wasn't just singular in terms of just seeing Issa and Molly all the time, and you brought in this larger friend dynamic as well, and their significant others, and let that play a role, because that's true life.
Yeah, how the significant others impact the friendship sometimes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I was wondering about the decision to name Issa's character Issa. Like, was that bred out of this need for authenticity?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember. I want to say she just wrote it in without thinking of it, and then later was like, "Oh shit!" That's really like honestly, like I don't think she realized it until we were too far down to change it necessarily. But
That's pretty funny.
yes.
Well, pivoting away from Insecure, because we could talk about it for hours.
Yeah.
I would love to hear more about your journey, and particularly like what your life was like growing up, right? Because Hollywood is obviously very different than how a lot of us grew up, right?
Yeah.
I want to hear more about that, and then maybe just like some other plot twist along the way.
Yeah, well, you're in for a joyride, because I like to look at my journey, and starting with my childhood is like it's a series of plot twists almost, right? And there's been a recurring theme that even this year I'm continuing to see and look back, and I'm like, oh yeah, Deniese, you've been here before. It just looked different, right? And it's always been around like kind of stepping out on faith and betting on myself, even though I didn't know what was going to be on the other side, and just having that like blind courage to be like, well, what else am I going to do? And so for me, I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm a second generation Vegas girl, very proud of it. My mom was born and raised, and so it was all I knew. It was my world. And I actually grew up playing basketball. I was a point guard, and that was my identity for my entire childhood until I was 16. And 16 was significant because after my sophomore year, I was playing for a high school whose girls team was like dominantly like amazing. Like they were winning state championships. And so I started seeing like that trajectory. And I grew up thinking I'm going to go to college and play basketball. Then, the WNBA didn't exist at the time. So I was like, and then I'm going to go to Tennessee State and then I'll figure it out. And after my sophomore year, I was like, oh, wait, I know what's next of me. It's now I'm going to have to practice on Saturdays. And like I had to step up from JV to varsity. And it kind of scared me only since I realized like, oh, I just love it for the sport. I don't love it that much. I was like, that feels like a job. And I just want to be 16 and like enjoy my life. And so I never went back out for the team. And it shocked everyone because they were like, what do you mean? Like I'd been playing since I was 7.
Because you were so good too.
Well, yeah. And I was like, I very much could have had a path, but I felt like to continue playing, knowing my heart wasn't in it that way, was taking away a spot from someone else. Like I was just like, I want to figure out like what else there is. And so so I'm starting my junior year, and there was a class in high school that everyone took as an elective. It was sports and entertainment marketing. And in that class, it's a class you like did your homework or slept or ditched to McDonald's in. Like you didn't really work. But there were like 5 students who would go next door to this classroom. And the teacher was also the student council advisor. And he, for the first time, was using the class for these students to set up a video broadcast room. And they started, used to do the intercom announcements in the morning, like in the intercoms. They were doing it via video broadcast. They were recording it in this class and editing it, and then later in the day I would see it being aired in my 4th period class. And so I'm just watching this as an observer, and I'm like, that is so interesting. And little by little in the class I was doing these little side projects, and then eventually the teacher was like, like you have a knack for this, you're a creative person. I was editing really well. He taught me how to edit on Adobe Premiere Pro. I used to be allowed to take the camera home, and I'm like doing these fake music videos with my sister. And by the time my senior year came, I was directing, producing, and editing our daily announcements. And that was my new identity. I became the video girl. I'm doing high school registration videos for the guidance counselors to go show to 8th graders before they came to school. I'm doing commercials for the blood drive because I'm a part of student council. And so I'm just like,
that is so
creating.
Cute, by the way. Like in retrospect, it's like you're actually making a commercial.
Sometimes I look back at those videos and I'm just like, wow. Okay. The green screen skills. We've come so far.
There's improvement.
Yeah. I mean, this is the early 2000s too, right? So video, like we were just starting to evolve, I think, within that space. And so I'm doing all of this, and now it's time for college. And I'm like, oh, wait, can I do this in college? And when I discovered you can get a degree in film, it sounded so foreign. Like I didn't know anyone in Vegas who had anything to do with Hollywood. I never thought about a career, but I had always wanted to go to school. And when I put the two together, I was like, well, I guess I'm going to go study this. Like I want to learn more about it. Like I didn't know this is an opportunity. And I had one goal in high school, which is I wanted to live in New York. I visited an aunt. I visited an aunt my freshman year in high school, and she was a stylist for the Jordan brand. And so I went to New York, and she takes me along, and I get to see her at work. And like, I met Michael Jordan, and I'm like seeing her at her job.
Quite fashionable.
Yeah, and like, but you have to remember, growing up in Vegas, I come from a single mother household who was really young, and she worked in the casinos. I didn't know anything about this world. I didn't even know this world existed. Like I remember looking at my aunt, like, this is a job? Like you dress these celebrities? Like what is this? And so when I went back home to Vegas after that spring break trip, it was my birthday present. So I got to go there for spring break. I'm 14, and I go home to Vegas, and home never looked the same, right? You all of a sudden go back to where you're from, and you're like, it feels so small. And I just remember telling people, guys, there's a world out there. Like there's so much more to aspire for. And so to me, New York was representative of that. I just was like, whatever it takes, like I want that feeling, and like that, I wanted to recapture that, but also I just knew that whatever I decided to do wasn't going to be in Vegas. I just was like, I have to get out of here. And so I put the two together. I didn't get into my dream school, which is NYU, broke my heart. And I had applied to other schools and was really trying to figure out, I almost went to SCAD. I got accepted to SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, with the scholarship. But I remember popping in the DVD with the campus video, and I was like, I can't go to
Savannah.
You're like, this is not New York.
From Vegas? Like
that would be
the South?
I'm from Atlanta, and the South. That would be a big.
And they're showing like, it almost feels like I'm watching like plantation homes and Main Street. And, they're like this beautiful little town. And I was like, I can't. I love film. Like, SCAD seems like a great program. And I remember them even trying to pitch me on like, we just opened an Atlanta campus. And I was like, Atlanta? And it's so funny because back then Atlanta was not what it is now, right?
Yeah,
so I was even more like, no. So anyways, here's what happens. I went back to New York the summer I graduated as a graduation gift. I'm out there visiting my aunt, and my mom calls me and was like, hey, while you're there, have you heard of this school called Brooklyn College? And I was like, what? Nah, I don't think so. And I looked up the website and was like, well, maybe it looks familiar. And she goes, okay, well, it's a public college. It's part of the CUNY system, which is kind of like our UC system here, right? So it's a bunch of interconnected state schools and publicly funded. And she was like, Brooklyn College has a film program. And while you're there, because my aunt lived in Brooklyn, she was like, you should go check it out. I'm like, all right. So we go down and they have this beautiful, like 100-plus-year-old brick campus in the heart of Brooklyn at the end of at the end of Flatbush. And you wouldn't even know it exists unless you're like from there. And I just fell in love. And my mom was like, great, I'm glad you liked it because I just submitted your application. And I was like, what? And she goes, I don't know. I just kept clicking next. And there was like no essay. She was just like, and then it was done. And when I came home.
She knows you very well.
Yeah, well, because she was just like, well, she goes, I figured if there was a question where I needed you, I'd tap you in. But she goes, I didn't well, because it was public college too. So it wasn't like there was like this long drawn out thing. And they had rolling admissions, right? Because it's June. So you're also like, who applies in June? But they had it still open. And so anyways, I come back from New York and I had my admissions letter waiting on my bed. And I packed up and moved to New York City 2 weeks later and started Brooklyn College for film. And so first, like, right place, right time of like, okay, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. And it was the first lesson, which you'll hear later, of just like what you think is intended for you, the path. You may eventually get there, but the path is going to look different, right? And not realizing that at the time. Yeah. So I go to New York. I'm excited about film school. I'm pumped, but I'm also like imposter syndrome, right? I'm like, okay, I'd already looked up all the jobs on set so I can be familiar with those roles. And I was like, oh yeah, editor, I've been doing that. Okay, director, I've been doing that. Like I had context, but then I came across the role of a producer and was like, wow, this is the best of all worlds. It's creative, it's business. It's like, I just loved the description. I loved it so much that I went and got a book by Lawrence Terman called So You Want to Be a Producer. And I started reading that on the plane, moving to New York. And in my heart, I was showing up to film school feeling like an outsider because I'm like, I just kind of discovered this thing. So I at least should know what I want to what I want to focus in. So that way it's like a leg to stand on. And, I just knew I was going to be with all these like Steven Spielberg kids who knew what Rosebud was. And like, I just was like, I don't know. Right. So I showed up my freshman year being like, I'm going to be a producer. And people are like, no one wants to be a producer. Not in film school.
And then you were like, well, hilarious. Lucky for you all, I do.
Well, to be fair, look, undergrad was great because I ended up producing a lot of undergrad thesis film. I always joke I had to direct one for my diploma to graduate, and I always joke and say I produced the hell out of my thesis film, but no one will ever see it like as a director. And look, I had 11 internships in New York City. I was just
that is a lot,
getting a lot of exposure because I was like, I'm in New York. It's not Hollywood, but there's media companies, and so I was interning at like The View one semester and going, I don't want to do talk shows. So everything just continued, I think, to be a learning experience. And so when college was when I was coming up on my 4 years, I was like, okay, so I still want to produce, but I'm 22 and I've done it in this college level experience. And I've seen a lot of like these offices and these companies, but I'm not confident that I can go out in the world and be a 22-year-old film producer. Like, who is going to allow me to do that? But also I was like, there's still something I'm missing, because as a film production degree, I had to take classes in everything, including producing, but I'm not concentrated in it. So I just felt like there's more to learn here. I love school. When I read Larry's book, he was the chair and this person who started the STARK program at USC. And so I had known that for 4 years. And I was like, there's this STARK program that you can get a master's in producing in. And so when that time came, I did my application and I was, this was like dream school again. And I needed a backup. And so I went to my film office and was like, I'm applying to the STARK program. I don't want to apply to UCLA. It's 3 years. I want another 2-year program. What do you recommend? And the other thing is I also was thinking about, okay, here's the LA stigma, right? Everyone's been told you got to move to LA at some point to have a career. And so I kind of knew that. I grew up hating LA. So I was like, all right, fine. here's what I'll do. I'll apply to grad schools only in Los Angeles. And if I get in, that'll be how I move. Because again, I don't have any money. I don't know anyone. I didn't want to like just drive out here and sleep on a couch and get a job. Like I was like, no, I'm going to use school again. I'll spend the 2 years learning everything I need to know, exploring and getting to know LA. And if I hate it, I'll just go back to New York afterwards with my master's. And if I love it, maybe I'll decide to stay, right? That was my thinking. And so anyways, the film office is like, yeah, there's this other school that we've had some alums go to called AFI. And I was like, what does that stand for? And they're like, the American Film Institute. And I was like, never heard of it. All right. So I looked into it. And when I came to LA to interview for SC, I remember my mom going, oh, do you want to visit the campus to that other school? And I was like, what? My backup? No, we're not doing that. So I never even went to see it.
You didn't go see it?
That's
no.
so funny.
And
it's so pretty.
yeah, it's beautiful.
It is. Yeah, it's in a great location.
Didn't get into USC, yes. But I got into AFI, and I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to AFI then. And once again, packed up my bags the summer I graduated, moved to LA, stayed with another aunt here for 6 months while I got acclimated. And I am always very honest in saying that AFI to me was one of the best things that ever happened, because it really did provide the space and the yearning I wanted from producing, in terms of just to learn. And, you know, if you know anything about the conservatory program, that's all you do. I couldn't come to AFI and be like, well, let me direct, or it's like, no, you are here to do this thing.
I only recently learned, I worked as a COVID officer during the pandemic, the early days of the pandemic, and I did a lot at AFI. And I didn't realize they had a producing track until I was a COVID officer there. And I was like, oh, that's so fantastic that they did a producing track.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No. And they have production design and editing. But like, again, it's like you go in for that discipline, and that's all you study. That's all you do. And what is also great about the conservatory model is that it's very hands-on. And so, yes, I'm in classes, but, you know, within my first year, I was producing 3 short films that were funded by the school, and then having a crew on other shorts. And so you are just like, you know, getting all of your sea legs out and getting that muscle built, right? And so,
and to give viewers context, these shorts are highly produced, right? We're not talking about, oh, you're spending $500 on a short film. Like, I think some of them range like anywhere between like $5,000 to $30,000 per short film.
Yeah. Well, here's the fun part. Your first year, they call them cycle films, because your first year, they're fully funded from the school, and they're never allowed to be submitted anywhere. The school owns them. They're only allowed to be showcased in school for learning purposes. We have what's called narrative workshop, where we watch them back for the whole class, for the entire first year class, and you're getting feedback and criticism on them. But they have a cap. When I was there, each cycle film had a cap of like $3,500. Now there's a little bit higher, but you have to remember, all the equipment was free. All of our HODs were free. Our head of departments, like I had a cinematographer, director, production designer, and editor, like on each project, right? And then we would AD or crew on each other's sets. And so the other cinematographers might be the camera operator on the short. And so you were always able to kind of use that money mainly for food and your locations and your permit, right? And you get a student permit, which is $25 at the time. Not so much, no. So you were able to make that money stretch, right? And so it created this this amazing kind of exercise, because there was no reason to not try to fail. Like, to be honest, because it's like, we're not doing this for any purpose of trying to get ahead, and this is going to be our Oscar winner. No, you are here to learn your skill set, right? And so just provided that opportunity. And then your thesis film, because then you only make one film your second year, and that's your thesis film. And then the school at the time gave each film $13,500, and then you were required to fundraise for the rest. And so that's when they're become a lot bigger budget. But when you see an AFI thesis films, and those are the ones that can go out and be nominated or go to do the festival route, you see a crazy production quality and elevation to them compared to other student films. And I think it's because of the way the program is set up in some ways. It's like none of us are jumping into it. They don't allow just someone to come in and be an auteur and do it all themselves. Like, you learn why a collaborative environment is so important. You learn how to trust your team, because you're all there to make the same thing. And, you know, and your first year, you're doing that so much that you're like so tired by the end of the first year. But you get so much out of it that your thesis, you're like, all right, we're locking in, or this is it, right? And I just feel like it really set us up.
And I love that it really forces filmmakers to get all their reps in, right? So that they're not they're not blowing all their money on that thesis film, having not directed anything else
1000%.
prior.
And by the way, we had no restrictions. And so the best part is like, I mean, I think one of my comedies was a drama. Another one was, one of my cycle films was a drama. Another one was a comedy. Some students did a musical. Some other ones did an action. Some did a thriller. And like, so you could do whatever genre you wanted to write and create, right? And the best thing is I tell people now who go to the school, I'm like, try to do a different type of film every time because it's what is going to challenge you.
That's
and
great advice.
You've never done comedy, then I don't do a comedy for a cycle film. It might surprise you, right?
Yeah.
But it's like such a chance to, again, build that muscle because it's a safe environment, right? That you should be able to just try to like fully limit yourself. I think everyone it's film school is so funny because it's like you go in with like everyone's going to be Tarantino. Everyone's going to just be, Sean Baker. And we're just going to do the art, dude. And, you have to like, there's some learning there. There's a learning
It was
curve.
really fun to watch that. I love being on the outside and watching all these folks at AFI do their thing.
Yeah,
that's really
great.
cool.
I graduated from AFI. It's 2012. In the year prior, in 2011, YouTube invested $100 million into 100 YouTube channels. And so I'm seeing this happen as I'm reading the news and I'm meeting other, freelancers and people during my second year at AFI, like other YouTubers who are doing things. And you could just see this explosion that was starting to happen because you have to remember in 2011, 2012, the only places you can upload videos were YouTube and Vimeo. You weren't able to upload videos on Instagram yet. It wasn't on Facebook. And so like we didn't have even the social media platforms that we have now, really. Like Twitter wasn't videos. Like it was just these two outlets. And so when YouTube did that, I always see it as what became the first investment in the online space, because prior to that, there was, you wanted to make something for YouTube, no one was giving you money for it. A web series, no one had heard of that. It was like Chris Crocker videos and cat videos, right? Like that was what was on YouTube. And so here comes this major tech company who's like, we're going to double down and invest in these channels to then invest in programming and original content. And so it starts to explode. And as I'm graduating, I'm like, okay, the Hollywood path is from what I'm told is you leave here, you go being an assistant, you go work at an agency, you try to get your foot in the door somehow, and then you work your way up and you just figure it out from there. And as a producer, there is really no straight and narrow path. You're just like, because who's just going to let me produce something unless I have the experience?
You have to work up the ladder.
Yeah. And honestly, I was like, that sounds crazy. That's just, I don't have time for that. And no shade, but I saw it as a way where I was like, wait, I just been busting my ass for 2.5 years, hands-on producing and getting dirty and just making stuff. And you mean to tell me I have to go sit in an office 60 hours a week and roll calls and pack that up in a closet until someone tells me I can do that? No, thank you. And so here's what I decided. I'm like, all right, well, I'm only 24. Digital's a thing. I feel like I'd had enough producing experience by then that I had a resume. It's not like I hadn't produced stuff. And the way I figured that part of the business was going, I'm like, well, they're not going to call Brian Grazer for this $30,000 web series. You can't really go and get Hollywood producers who are interested in this. And so who's going to be the ones who are working on these things? It's us. It's these young film kids who don't mind getting paid very little, but just want to work. And I felt like if I threw my hat in the ring, maybe I can sustain for a little bit. And I think coming from a place of never having money, I wasn't scared of that. I was like, I just need to, God, at the time I was like, I just need to clear $1,500 a month and I'm good. Which is crazy. My rent used to be $900 LA.
Yeah, same.
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time. Not anymore.
Not
anymore.
No. So the threshold to survive was pretty low. And so I just was like, I just have to work enough jobs and we'll see. And I always said, if it failed, the backup plan is I'll go get a job. Those assistant jobs have been there since from the test of time. They have not gone anywhere. And so why not take a little bit of a risk and just say, let's see what happens. And if I fail or if I become broke or I'm not going to get homeless, so I'll just get a job. It's fine. But I've always wanted to just follow with what makes me happy? What are my instincts? And that's what it was at the time. And so I started trying to network a little bit and I'm getting ready to graduate and I'm applying to these jobs, producer for a music video, $5,000 and stuff like that. And my thing was, I'm not a producer who can help you raise money. I don't know people with money, so I have to have a budget. And I'm not a type of producer who was going to come in and just develop from scratch. It was just hey, if you need someone who's going to help you execute, call me. That'll be my thing. And so now we're in June of 2012, and this is how I'm applying to freelance producer gigs. And this is how I applied to one that said there was a web series that needed a line producer, and that ended up being Issa. And so
Wild.
I think for the next 2.5 years, I was a freelance producer. Like, I worked with her on a lot of things, but I also wasn't getting paid a lot at the time. Like, she was like my passion work. Everything we were doing was like, this is what I really want to be doing. But then when I wasn't working with her, I also had to continue to pay the bills. So I was producing, again, music videos, shorts, like just anything. I mean, now I look back and I'm like, I might have done like, I don't know, 100 things in 3 years. Like, just you know.
But you were producing.
It was
you didn't
producing.
Go get an assistant
yeah,
job. You were doing it.
And I was doing everything, you know, like that's like some of the fundamental part of my years of just like, I used to like go pick up the U-Haul truck, the budget truck actually, and I would go to, the camera place, and then I would go and pick up my production supplies. Like, I was driving the trucks on sets.
I have this vivid memory of, because I did the same thing you did in college, but I didn't go to film school. So we created our own undergraduate production company. And I have this vivid memory of driving a cube truck through the night after we had been filming all day, and I had to deliver it back to New York City. We're shooting in Connecticut.
Oh man.
So it was like drive through the night and then drive it across the city, and I'm like this 19-year-old, 20-year-old almost getting into a car accident. But yeah, you had to be a driver and crafty.
Couldn't afford anything else. Sorry. Like, you just, that's just what it is.
And can I add that, like, in YouTube land now, I currently have been producing in YouTube world. It is very, very much returning to that, right? Where you don't have that many resources. So you have to be your own location manager, your own line producer, and on-set accountant and PA.
I've done my cost reports. Yes. I've done it all before. I've done my own shooting schedules, like all of that.
Yeah.
But
you've always had a plan. Can I just notice that you were always one step of anyone, I think, your age at the time, doing what they were doing. You just always had a plan, knew exactly what you were capable of, weren't going to tell anyone you were going to do something you didn't want to do or didn't think you could do. Like,
well, I think
you
often
just had it. You just knew.
Well, it's funny. Let me correct you. It's like, I thought I had a plan.
Let me correct you.
I would think I have a plan, because if you can see, this is now start to see my pattern of my life, where it's like, all right, I'm going to go do this thing. And then I'm like, who would have thought, though, me applying to a job because I had this mindset at the time, would lead me to partnering and meeting someone who I always say, like, used to change my life, because then 2.5 years later, she didn't have to call me up and say, hey, girl, why don't you come do this pilot with me? I could have still been figuring out my own way, right? And so she opened that door, but it was kind of kismet from those 2 years prior. And so it's like, at the time that I met her, I'm just doing the web series. I never thought in a million years that relationship would go and be the thing that would help me transition to the next phase in my career, right? And so that's the thing. It's like you have a plan, but I always think of like the now, and I find, especially in Hollywood, oftentimes people are trying to assimilate, or they're trying to make choices based off of what someone else has done or what they're told is best for you. Yeah. And I'm always like, no, the best thing about this town is that no one has the same journey. Yeah. You can talk to thousands of people about how they came up, and no one's going to tell you the same thing. Now, they may both tell you, oh, I started at an agency, but ask them how they got that agency job. Right. It's going to be a completely different story. And so I think I had the wherewithal early on to just kind of feel like, well, my mom has always been like, it's whatever you want to do with your life. And so, I've always just had the instinct to say, okay, well, what makes me happy? Like, I know what I'm supposed to do, but what do I actually want to do? And like having that, like I said, the courage to just be like, well, why not? Well,
the confidence, I would say, because that's something that took me a long time. Like, I don't know if it was like the immigrant mindset in me of like, oh, you got to keep your head down and you have to know how to do the job better than anyone to even call yourself a producer or even call yourself a writer. Like, you have to have written 20 scripts before you can call yourself I think that there's something to be said about how you knew that you could do the job at the age of 24, like straight out of grad school, right? Like there are those of us that it takes us a while to develop that confidence.
Yeah, that's true. Well, yeah, because I'm like, the way I see it was like, well, if not now, then when? Yeah, right. So it's like, if I'm gonna jump in, if I'm going to be a producer, I guess I should produce things and see where that takes me. And I've been very fortunate, but it's also, like I said, the journey will take you in so many different places, and the where I end up has always been where I wanted to be. I'm always like, well, I just didn't think that was be the path. I mean, I joke now and say, guys, I started in television. I used to want to make movies. I mean, now I've made movies, but I went to film school with that burning desire to be like, I want to make the Little Miss Sunshines of the world. Like, I just want to make good movies. And then I remember a couple seasons into Insecure, I was like, how did I get to television? I never thought about TV, you know, but also growing up and the way I was coming up in the 2000s, TV wasn't what it became after 2010, right? So everything just evolved, and, you know, I've...
Your adaptability.
Yeah, and being aware to that, like, sometimes you also hang on to, like, the past and how someone else made it, and you're like, no, like, that also was, like, I don't know, 1985. So, like, what was happening for them in that current time is very different than what's happening for you. And so being aware of just, like, I think opportunity, like, even now, I think it's fascinating, these vertical dramas, these micro shorts, to me, they are such a cyclical nature of what web series was for me in 2012. They're hiring these film students, and they're the ones who are working non-union, and they're, like, cranking it out and figuring it out. But the way that it's, like, so new on this scene, and everyone's like, oh, is this here to stay? And what is this? I was like, guys, this is literally what happened in 2012. Like, let's talk about it. Like, it is. It's just a different.
It's cyclical.
It's cyclical, but it looks different, but it's familiar. And so, yeah, I think just being privy to all of that. And yes, I eventually did get to make my movies. But once again, I'm like, man, even if I had the ego early on to be like, no, I want to make movies. I don't want to do web series. I'm just going to do this. I'm like, who knows how long it would have taken me, right? So to even be open to the journey where even when I started doing Insecure, I didn't sit there and, like, ever think less than or think like, well, this isn't what I wanted to do, so I'm not going to take this opportunity. When Issa offered it to me, I could have been like, oh, no, girl, like, I don't want to do TV. I was like, yeah, let's jump in. Let's see what it's about. And, you know, I think actually I'm very fortunate because it's harder to do the reverse, I think. I think it's a lot harder to have a career in film and then to try to break into TV because, once again, talk about politics and processes, they operate very differently. And so I think to learn the more professional side of producing and starting in television only made me that much more of a better film producer later because film, I was like, oh God, this is like my short days. There's one director and there's one script and we're just like, we're doing everything singular. Whereas TV is so fast, and, you know, you're producing 8 hours of something within 6 months.
It's also less, usually less page count when you're doing a film versus a TV show, right?
You have more time. You have much more time. So I'm always very grateful that, my journey looks a lot different than others, but I'm always like, oh, there's some lessons in there, I guess.
I would love to get into how you've pivoted from TV now to making features.
Yeah. So over the years, so I ended up working with Issa up until the end of 2020. I became her producing partner. She had an HBO deal. We developed and produced, Black Lady Sketch Show and the first season of Rap Shit. And when COVID happened, I was at my own kind of inflection point in my career where I realized, like, it had been 8 years since I met her, and you just look up and you're like, what is time? How do we get here? So much has happened in 8 years. We've just been nonstop. And one of the things also was I hadn't made a movie. We had sold a lot of films in development to various studios and financiers, but nothing had gotten made yet. But I think personally, I was at a place too where, I think when COVID happened and we were home for especially those first few months, and you were like, so what now? I had a lot of time to think, and things were slowed down enough for the first time in years where I was like, okay, here's where I am. Here's where I thought I'd be, but I think I'm past where I thought I'd be. And God, COVID, I'm 32. So, like, I was like, okay, I want to make movies, but I also realized, going back to, like, my film school dreams, was like, oh, I'd always wanted to be a producer on my own. I always wanted to have my own company, and I looked up to, like, Gail Ann Hurd and Stacey Shear and, like, and Kathleen Kennedy and all these, like, great producers from back in the day. And I was like, well, they had their own thing as a female producer, and I'm not a multi-hyphenate. I don't direct. I'm not a showrunner. I have no interest in acting. I just produce. And so I want to be like an OG producer who can have their own thing. And honestly was like, but I don't know what my voice is as a producer because I've always been a producer for someone else. And so I thought about, I think over the 8-year run, there was a moment where I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that later. And then in COVID, I had that same thought where I was like, all right, Deniese, well, if not now, then when? When is later, right? What are you waiting for? Is it more success? And honestly, we were wrapping up the last season of Insecure that year, which I knew. And so I was like, this felt like a perfect time to kind of pivot, I think. And so I mapped out, an exit strategy with Issa and just was like, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. And it's like June. I was like, but the good news is it's not a 2-week notice. So I got to stick around for like 6 more months and figure out, what I was going to do, because what I knew was I didn't want to work for anyone else. I didn't want to go get a job. I was like, no, I'm leaving because I really need to figure out who am I as a producer by myself. Like, what is my voice? What are the stories I want to tell and champion? And I think when you are doing that by default with someone else's brand, the two the lines can blur, right?
Sure.
And so I took another leap of step because another step of faith, because I had to ask a lot of friends. I had imposter syndrome again. I was like, can I do this? Am I stupid? Like, this is the best job in the world. Why am I leaving? It was so like a bad breakup where you're like, it's not you, it's me. It's me. I'm in a place where I need to do this for me. And it was scary because I'm essentially going out to be an independent producer, right? Which means I don't have a deal yet. I don't what am I going to do for my income? And so I really had to strategize and just say, all right, let's just see what happens. And so this gets into the movies, because I'm like, I still hadn't made a movie yet. This is now entering 2021. I launched Reform Media, which is my own company. And right around that same time, I ended up getting introduced to Tyler Perry and was like, hey, Tyler, and was telling him about what I'm doing. And he ended up offering me a producing deal. And so I ended up doing a 2.5-year deal with Tyler Perry Studios. And that is actually where my first movie came from. I brought them a script from a young first-time filmmaker that I fell in love with, and they greenlit it. And right after the strikes, actually, because it was supposed to happen when the strikes happened. But in February of 2024, I was in Atlanta shooting this $3 million indie film with this first-time filmmaker. And I had never been happier, right? Like,
I love that.
It really was the thing that I think gave me like the cell under my wings that I was like, oh, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And this couldn't have been a better first film project for me because it was only $3 million. We shot this in 14 days. So I very much went back to my roots in the way that we put it together. And the filmmaker, Jo Hatcher, is incredible. And she was 25 when she directed this and is so mature and is so talented.
What was it about her script, if I may ask?
Yeah, her script was kind of like Blue Valentine in that it told this love story with these two young 18-year-olds through 2 different time periods. And it interwove it so perfectly where you start the script thinking it's one thing and you really think it's about their love story and this relationship. And by the third act and when everything kind of comes full circle, you realize like, oh, it's actually a movie about grief and moving on and being strong and dealing with your parents. And like, it was a lot deeper than that. And it was one of those scripts when I finished it, like it stayed with me all night, right? And it's like I had to go back the next day and look at it again because it just, I love a story that resonates with you and touches you deeply, but also, you can't leave your mind, right? Because there's something about it and its DNA that just, I think, is pulling at you. For me, it's always like, I have not seen this before. I have not seen this story told this way. And so, and I'm really grateful the studio saw it that way too. But as soon as we started putting it together, I was like, oh, wow, I get to go make this film. But again, being that it was so indie, it felt like I was coming full circle from when I just first started, right? Because I just like took everything I knew at that point, all of my resources, and was just able to go for it. And it was the scariest thing because I was like the sole producer on this. It's not like there's a big team and I'm with all these other companies. It was like, all right, Deniese, go make your movie. and there was a lot of responsibility in that, but we made an incredible film and I'm extremely proud. Here's the irony. We wrapped this film end of February of last year. I come back to LA in March and we're doing these chem tests with Keke Palmer and SZA for this movie that Issa and I sold in 2017, 2018 to Sony. And I just kept being like, oh, this movie's just been in development hell for so long. Like, they're never going to make this film. It's an original comedy with 2 Black women, with a first-time director. It's written in LA. Once again, it's an original comedy. There's no IP. Like, in what world are they ever greenlighting this? They don't make these movies. And we do these chem tests, and I watch the tapes, and I'm like, oh shit, their chemistry is crazy. And by April, they're like, all right, so here we're looking at shooting in June, and let's get the production offices up, and we're hiring department heads. And I was like, what's happening? are we making this film? Like the whole time I was still in disbelief. And I think with every week that passed, everyone just like jumped right in. We were like, all right, because the studio was like, it's kind of this summer or never because of the girls' schedules. And so we were like, all right, well, I just remember being like, let's just show up every day until they change their mind, because like this is crazy. And we ended up starting production July 1st of last year. And I just being on set, still being like,
wow,
how did I get here? Also, again, I had no intention of making a second movie this year, but I was like, all right, I guess this is what we're doing. And we finished the movie, and then they're like, okay, now we want to put it out in January. And we're like, in 3 months?
That is so quick.
Wow.
And this is a Netflix movie, right?
No, this was theatrical.
This
is one of them days. Sorry, this is one of them days.
Yeah,
one of them days.
So
but
it came out in
Netflix.
Yeah, well, it came out theatrically in January of 2025, and then it was on Netflix by March. And then now I love people are like, oh, I watched a movie on the plane. I'm like, that's crazy. But I think, so you can imagine 2024 was just like rocked my world, because not only did I get to make my first movie, but I made 2. I made my first tiny independent film, and then I made my very first commercial theatrical studio film back to back. And talk about me being like, all right, be careful what you ask for.
So like a $3 million budget versus like a 24,
like 15, 16.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Wow.
And we also shot that in 20 days. It felt like an indie studio film.
Oh, wow. 20 days.
20 days.
So it was like,
wild.
It felt like a studio film, but indie. Because it was like, we were still having to like cram a lot in there.
Wow, I can't even wrap my brain around that with how much happened in that film.
Yeah.
How many locations?
You and me both.
And whoa.
And then imagine how fast we were moving too.
And
so
how
we were just
fast,
like, all right, let's just jump in. But I mean, I'm so proud and thrilled that the movie was well received and that it did well. I mean, now we're knee deep into figuring out the sequel potentially, which we're so excited about.
I'm so excited about that.
Yeah, just so thankful for. But that's the crazy part of like going back to like making my first films. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I got to make one. I actually made 2, and they couldn't be completely different experiences, but they were so enriching. And yeah, honestly, after last year, I was like, I think I just want to make movies. Like, I'll go back to TV. I'm still developing TV projects, but there was something like, I think after doing TV for 8 years too, and you're just in this machine, to go back into the feature space and have 2 different experiences. I think for me as a non-writing producer, I was so much more fulfilled, right? Because it was like, oh, this is the medium in terms of just being in the trenches with the director and just really executing the singular vision versus trying to upkeep a consistent story for hours on end, right?
Yeah.
And also policing a network, not just a director.
Yes. So
I love that it seems like you now are starting to have a body of work that reflects your voice, right? Like, could you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what kind of stories do you gravitate to? Is it comedic along the lines of One of Them Days? Kind of insecure in tone, or like it's because Blue Valentine's obviously very different. So do you gravitate to both buckets?
No, I mean that's an interesting thing. It is a little bit of everything. When I've had to define what my tastes are, what am I attracted to, I think the thing that stuck out the most is I'm very genre agnostic. Comedy has just been a part of my resume, honestly, because I came up with Issa for so long, and naturally people put me in that box, and I was like, I do more than just comedy. I love other types of stories, right? And so the indie film, what I would consider that like a romance drama, right? And I actually just produced my first doc series that's premiering in a few weeks. And so like I'm gravitated towards, I think, just stories in general. But then within that field, I think I found that I love, again, I asked myself, okay, have I seen this before? If not, if I have, how is this different? What is it doing differently? Is there a nostalgic factor to it? But also, I'm attracted to the things that are trying to be risky and trying to do something new in terms of how it's telling its story. I'm not interested in like, people were like, oh, okay, rom-coms work, so we got to find the formulaic film that feels like the other movie that just came out. It's like, no, we're just finding the singular voice that has something very specific to say. And I love even some of the things I'm developing now. I'm always like, I think I just set myself up to fail, because like I'm saying yes to things that honestly on the surface are probably challenging to get made, because there's not a lot of things you can compare it to, right? But for me, that's actually what makes it exciting. And I believe wholeheartedly in finding success in things that are original, right? I tell everyone, it's like we're all chasing this high and we all want to be like that other show. But when you think about that other show, that other movie, you realize, well, there was nothing else like it that came before it. And so what does that tell you? Well, it says that audiences are willing to invest and bet on things that are new experiences and new types of stories. They are also interested in just getting outside the box. And so I think the more we can rely on that, the better off we'll be. And honestly, it's one of my gripes with prestige films right now and where they've gone. They've all kind of gotten into this muddled area where they all feel the same sometimes. And you're like, I don't know, guys, let's do something a little bit different, right? And like carry a film a little bit differently. And I think an audience will show up in the box office. And I think even when you see One of Them Days, I'd argue the great thing about One of Them Days is that it felt nostalgic. It felt very familiar to a lot of classic films we've seen before in buddy comedy situations. Friday comes up all the time.
Friday, yep.
However, on its surface, you can also tell that this is a wholly original film, right? Yeah. You were like, but I actually haven't seen this before. Like, you're so torn.
You haven't. And it had the kernels of like Insecure had of like at the heart of it, it's the love story of these two young women, how much they care about each other and their friendship and their relationship. And they're like, it was, I love that.
No, again, that speaks to me. A revelation in the film. That was the other thing that was such a breakthrough. I mean, we've seen Keke Palmer. She's had a very prevalent career, right? And she's been around for over a decade, if not more. But this, to me, this was such a unique role. I loved her in it. I think it showed a totally different facet to her performance, or you know. So I do. She's very different. I think that's a big part of it, right? The chemistry between the two. Yeah. The fact that they're both stars in the world, you know, is finally getting to see what I'm sure a lot of us have felt for a long time.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and look, and then it's kind of brought comedies back now. Studios are all developing their own comedies, and they're like, well, look at that. Now they're not afraid to take the risk because like one movie showed that an audience will still show up. You know what I mean?
Very inspiring to hear that that's what speaks to you, and you're really trying to push this like original and let's make our own things that speak to us. Because I just I went to a screening of Sinners a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about how, again, what is the stats? I'm going to screw this up. It's like that was the first film that's made the kind of money it has, I think. It's had the box office explosion that was an original script in like something like 15 years.
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
I feel like I'm messing this up, but it's
you don't
close.
Realize, from a theatrical standpoint, you actually don't realize just how few original films have been getting made.
Yes.
Minus the Prestige season, right? Because those are the indie darlings and a lot of the films that come in from the auteurs and the people who are going for the academies. But that space is, and then even then they're smaller, right? So it's so reserved for those type of films, and then everything else is IP or remakes or reimaginings. And to be fair, I'm actually really interested sometimes in that space too, but I'm more so looking at IP going like kind of similar like a One of Them Days. You're like, okay, if you're going to reboot this, how do you just do it completely differently? Like no one wants to touch the classic. If it was done a certain way, like it's successful because it was done that way. But I think you could still sometimes take the DNA or the origin of the story and tell it in a different way, especially when so much time has passed. And sometimes I feel like I see remakes and they just get it wrong. They're just regurgitating the exact same film almost. And you're like, no one wants that. No one wants that. Yeah.
Sometimes it's regurgitated, but then not done as successly. And you're like, but why did you remake it then? If you're not going to make it better than the original.
No, it's so true. It's so true. I always like to ask the question too. I'm like, what's a remake of something that you've seen that you actually think was better than the first?
Whew.
Oh, yeah.
John, do you have any ideas?
I certainly don't.
Cut to producer John over here.
22 Jump Street.
That's true. That's fair.
21 Jump Street. 21 Jump Street is so good. To be fair, I have not watched the original.
I can't think of anything. I mean, maybe if I had more time.
Let the Right One In. I love the original. I did not like the remake. So I keep thinking of these remakes that just
asking
are
which one was
not
better.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm always
I
like,
keep coming up with a blank.
No one asked for it. Just do the original. Just do a completely original story.
Exactly.
And you'll find success because people have already seen that. They're not as interested. But I don't know. It's like Hollywood trying to like keep the lights on somehow, some way.
But this feels
it's
what
risk
you're
aversion.
Talking,
you know.
Sorry. No, just what you're talking about is that we're starting to do it more, and that One of Them Days is inspiring that, and so that makes me feel hopeful because I feel like we're not. Like I don't know. Maybe I'm just not paying enough attention. But when I think about like how to meet this moment and what's happening right now, like, do we think more of this is going to start opening up?
I think so. This year to me is kind of slowly becoming a pivot towards a little bit more less risk averse showing up. So I think of like our film One of Them Days, and then Sinners came out in April, and then Weapons did really, really well. And I enjoyed Weapons so much because I was it was so refreshing. And I hate scary movies, but I still was so locked into like I think the story and how he approached it, you know, and because you know,
it was so different.
It felt like you were watching an old school like Steven Spielberg classic as a horror film, right? Like there was something that just had its pulse on. And I'm trying to think of anything recently. Oh, I actually really enjoyed One Battle After Another, to be honest, too. Like, it was really packed with a lot of stuff, but it was so like, again, this old like nostalgic feeling of these old thriller action type films in that same way.
Train Dreams, I highly recommend.
I haven't seen that
and
yet.
It's another movie where I felt this way about One of Them Days. It was a small movie that felt big.
Yeah.
Like a lot happens, but at the heart of it, it
very
truly
simple.
is about this friendship, right? Train Dreams is similar.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that there might be a little bit of a renaissance, hopefully.
I think so. I think, well...
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting. Well, and it's tough because I think where the business is going currently is that there's obviously still so much consolidation happening. And within the consolidation, there's a lot of pullback. So there's less jobs, less opportunities, less money being spent in development, less money being spent. Budgets are being very much like kind of pulled back and a little bit more conservative, as they should, because I think they got out of hand for a long time where it's like, you can't make every film at $80 million, guys, because it's not going to make its money back. You know, it's not sustainable. And so they're having to pull back. And as they're pulling back, though, I think what you realize is like, oh, okay, well, now we might have to look at different types of stories and how we tell these stories in order to make them at a certain price point. You know what I mean? And so that, I think, is allowing more space for, you know, there used to be 5 remakes and what have you because they were all $100 million plus. And now it's like, all right, well, let's do 2 of those. But why don't we take $100 million and make 3 movies out of it instead? And when you do that, I think some studios are looking at taking a little bit more of a risk because there's less money being spent. And that's where I think you're going to get a little bit of the breakage and get a few more, I think, pieces of original stories in there. Maybe because of my own journey, but I'm a huge believer in what we're seeing happen, I think, in various ways, which I look at as like the democratization of storytelling, right? And so what does that mean? It means that, yes, there's a lot of consolidation happening in Hollywood, which therefore is giving us less permission to get these stories told. But what you're seeing on the other side, and let's call it the creator economy, is more and more people saying, okay, well, I'm not going to actually wait for you to say yes. I'm just going to figure out how to do it on my own. And now, in the world we're living in right now, what's really exciting is that there's never been more opportunities to try to find and build your own audience. Like there used to be, you know, people would say that for a long time. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of like YouTube early on. But now it's so much bigger than YouTube, right? Now you have so much between the streamers and fast channels and so many ways to even self-distribute if you start to learn a little bit more about the business. Like one of my things is I tell people, I never wanted to raise $100 million to like create a film financing company or a film fund. Because I think even when you have all the money in the world, you're still dependent on distribution. You're still dependent on Hollywood to then say that your film is going to find an audience and make money. And so they still actually are gatekeeping and have the ability to say no. And so when you can be empowered to take that on yourself and say, okay, well, what if I just do a little bit of money and actually put more money into learning how do I distribute my own content and tell the stories? Because then once you start to have success, well, no one can deny you now. And then the ironies in Hollywood always comes back to you and you're like, all right, well, no, I don't want to give this away, because to me, ownership is key. And now there are more opportunities to own your own things. And that's where you create value. That's where you create long-term value. And so I tell people, I'm like, go to the film markets, understand these licensing deals, and know that just because you have a great story and you can get disappointed because you're like, no one in Hollywood's investing in it. And like, yeah, well, DI is completely out of there. So yeah, no, they're not. But guess what? The internet and everyone else who you can reach, you can find success, right? And there's almost a little bit of the indie spirit of, remember when people like the Weinsteins used to like take a film and they would take it to certain cities and for wallet in certain places, like that's actually having a big resurgence too through a lot of companies who are using data to prove and show that there are audiences and can drive certain ticket sales. And so to me, that is kind of where there's there's optimism. You know what I mean? Because yes, we can talk about YouTube, but what I'm talking about is the sustainability of being a storyteller and being a creator right now. And how you're able to monetize that in so many ways in which we weren't able to before. And not just through ads. I'm talking about monetizing it through products, monetizing it through a podcast, monetizing it through books. Like you can create a flywheel to economically support yourself and continue to tell stories while growing your audience. And at some point being fully independent of the system itself. And so you then get to a point where you're like, well, do I actually need Hollywood or do they actually need me? Because now they're asking.
Yeah, that's when Hollywood comes knocking at your door.
Yeah. Well, and some of the YouTube creators
the
and people that I'm seeing do it, they're being smart in that they're licensing their content non-exclusively, so they can still allow it to be on their channel because they're not going to take it away from their audience, but they're not giving up ownership. So now what you're doing is actually creating a second pay window for your own content outside of the platform you're putting it on. Same thing with what's happening with Tubi. Tubi's coming into these creators and they're licensing their content similarly in the same fashion. So now you're using the main big studios in Hollywood, all the people you want to work with, you're still being able to work with them. And the biggest reason why you want to work with them is because they are able to market and bring something to a wider global audience. And that's all you need, right? And so you don't really need them to actually give you the permission. And I think that's where we get so disappointed because I'm like, guys, you're not going to convince someone who's also 80 years old who has no idea what the audience wants to watch these days. And so prove it in so many ways. And that's what I think is fascinating because I'm telling you, when I started in digital, Vimeo and YouTube, you couldn't upload a video to social media, right? And now you have social media, but you have so many other windows and platforms. And now you also have it globally in a way that global distribution wasn't even around 15 years ago. And so, I don't know, I just believe in that so wholeheartedly because I still see that success happening. And to be honest, I've been saying, I think we might be hitting an inflection point come sooner or later, which is what's going to be bigger. Like people don't realize YouTube is actually the more dominant place where you have more people watching YouTube content than Netflix. You know what I mean? And so you're like, okay, what does that mean for Hollywood? Hollywood might actually be second to the creator economy in a lot of ways, where these people are actually leading the charge and building audiences and niches, and Hollywood's now trying to keep up. What I learned and having the naivety of being like, Hollywood's going to change. It's not. It's never going to change. Yeah. And it's always change in order to keep up and realizing how they could have been the leader in a lot of different ways, whether it's streaming, technology, like you name it, but they're always playing catch up. And a lot of it is because Hollywood has gotten so big that when you become that giant and corporate and dependent on Wall Street, you do not have the ability to pivot. You just don't because you are too reliant on where you're making your money from. So you know who does have the ability, the new tech startups, these streaming platforms who are newer, who kind of have more of a consolidation in their business. And then people who like are us who have a great story to tell and can tap into that audience. And then you can find ways to proliferate that in however many ways they can, right? Because we have the freedom as entrepreneurs essentially to experiment a lot more, you know, and I'd argue you could stand to actually have a very successful, nice financial living more than even taking the one-off check that Netflix is going to give you for doing that one show, that one time that may not get a second season. I think you're going to see a lot of like mini creator studios start to come up. And so what I mean by that is like you might have a creator who like finds their niche and finds a lot of success in one area, but then they're going to go and use that distribution network to then supply and support other creators as well who are tangential to that same subject matter, right? I think everything about the internet is niche driven, and which is why you can find success is that it's very rare unless you're like a Mr. Beast to have like a wide audience and very broad audience. Most people who are successful are hitting success based off of an audience that are very specific to whatever their themes or their subject matters are, and that's great. But what that means is that you can now be a little bit more dominant in controlling that entire niche in some ways by just continuing to expand and supporting other people who are trying to get in on that. And so like that's when I'm like, oh, these are like mini Walt Disney Studios. Like you're gonna see a lot of these different like
fascinating.
Studios who are just like all competing for the same market share because there's only so many eyeballs in the world. There really is. So this year for me, the biggest reflection period that I had is, so my deal ended at the end of last year. So I went back into 2025 as an independent producer again. Terrible timing because 2025 has been really terrible for our business and seeing so many friends get laid off, lose their jobs, not find work, et cetera, et cetera. And so I kind of realized like I had two epiphanies. One is I was like, oh my God, Deniese, you messed up because I've been so driven on trying to find success and have this career as a television film producer in the way that I thought the business used to work, right? In terms of how lucrative it used to be, that I recognize that my entire income for my entire career, which yes, I've only been a producer, but yet that has been the only money I've ever made. And so now I'm at a point where our business is in peril, but I'm so dependent on this business to live a sustainable life that like, I recognize like, oh, there's no longevity in that anymore. Because it's not like, oh, this like, just hang on, everything's going to get better. It's like, it might, but while I'm waiting for it to get better, what can I do? And so I have also had to open up and figure out how do I diversify my own skill sets and talents as a producer and think about other ways in which it can be applied. And so this is when I started the Producing Playbook this year and started an online creator course, right, where I'm teaching people producing skills because I think it is the most overlooked but valuable position that a lot of people don't understand. But in the creator economy, everyone's going to need to learn how to do it, right? And so, yes, it's one way to make some extra money, but it's also an extension of what I already do. And so I've been looking at all these other fields, but right now it's like the key to the pivot is, I think, understanding that like, okay, what once was will no longer be. We don't know yet what it's becoming, but what I can control is like, how am I going to adapt in the meantime, right? Because I can't stay this young, 18-year-old who thinks like the film business is the 90s. Like, it's like, that's what I learned. But the reality, my reality is like, oh, that's not what this is anymore. So I just have to be kind of one step ahead and evolving myself. And that's been my thing is I'm like, okay, I do not think it is going to be sustainable to be a television film producer for the rest of my career. That's not going to be the thing that builds generational wealth or legacy for myself. So what else do I do? Because I still love producing and I'm not going to quit, but I recognize I actually might have to be other things. And I think all of us are finding ourselves in that. I told a writer friend the other day who hadn't been able to get staffed on a television show. I'm like, but you used to be a journalist. You might have to go look at writing scripted podcasts and going back to writing some articles, starting a Substack. Like, we're all doing it. And the biggest thing that I think is interesting, I disagreed with it, but now I'm going to agree with it, which is we're now entering a new age where it almost feels like everyone has to be a creator.
Yes.
You're going to have to be a creator.
We talk about that on the podcast. Like our very first episode, we talked about how Anna's dad told her at some point, you have to be Anna Inc.
You gotta be Anna Incorporated.
Yeah, you have to be your own creator and be your own entrepreneur. Like, we're all gonna have to find that, because I think the days of just doing the one thing and being able to have that be a sustainable career, I just don't think that's gonna be it.
Yep. Yeah. And even when you are making good money at doing the one thing, it's always in the back of your mind, right? Like, when I've been on TV shows, oh gosh, when is this going to be done? And then I'm going to have to go back to freelancing at the time for Duolingo.
Yeah. Well, because it's like there's a top 1%, and that's where we all aspire to be. But in the top 1%, they're fine. They're going to be fine. They're great. They're not going anywhere. And there will be more people who enter that 1%, but it takes a long time. And it's such a I want to say it's such a draw of luck, but it's like, it's not guaranteed. So, kind of just not having that rose-colored glasses on all the time and just realizing like, okay, here's our new reality. And so if I'm going to weather the storm, what do I do? Because if I just sit back and act like, oh no, it's all fine and I've done enough, then, there's going to be a rude awakening to get into. And so, it's actually, again, going back, that's why maybe I'm optimistic, because I'm like, oh, like once I recognized that and started making shifts this year, I've never been more excited, because I've been more freeing of myself of the stress and the worry and the concern, while also having to recognize like, all right, Deniese, you've also done enough to like rest your own marathon. Like, it's like, you know, like I always have this thing where I'm like, but I haven't done enough yet. And you're like, but what's enough? Like, how do you define success for yourself? And so knowing what that balance is, so that way you can be content while also being open-minded to just explore and not feel like, okay, if I don't do this full time, does that mean I'm a failure? No, it just means that you can be more than one thing.
Yes.
And I think that is okay.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's what we're going to need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of us find, and this is what I've learned in a lot of these interviews, is sometimes you just have to try that different thing and you might like it just as much, if not more. You know, it's like, we've interviewed someone who went from being an actor to being a development exec. Our friend Lauren. And she loves being a development exec, but she had to try that different step, right? Yeah. So it's about sometimes just having the courage to say, I'm going to try something different and I'm going to diversify my skill set, right? And then who knows, you might really enjoy it.
You might enjoy it, and you might enrich the other qualities and the other things you were doing even more than you realize, right? Because you're just taking in those experiences and those life experiences back into your creative self. And I think that at the end of the day is kind of how it all, you know, it's all cyclical.
It's a real mindset though. And and if you don't naturally feel that way, it's something to have to train yourself to do, to be adaptable and be able to keep thriving in this industry. And keep surviving.
And for myself, like I'm so excited about that producer's playbook that you're talking about. We'll put a link in the bio, or in the description of the video. But we've talked about how that's a skill set that as actors, even, you have to learn how to produce your own content, right? As writers, I have a lot of friends that have never been on set, but yet they've been staffed several times and don't necessarily know the ins and outs of how to run a set. And then all of a sudden they're thrown into, okay, you're producing your episode. And they're like, how do I do this? I've just been in a writer's room.
So true.
So it's so helpful for people outside of those that want to be producers.
I just think it's funny. It's the one job. I'm part of Producers United, and we always talk about how the career producer is becoming kind of an extinct a little bit, because now talent, showrunners, directors, everyone's a producer, and they all have a production company now. And so they've kind of eroded, I think, space for the people like myself who doesn't do anything else but produce, right? Because now you're like, everyone's a producer. However, I think even in that retrospect, because of how we create stories, how we do production, I'm like, someone's always still going to need to do the job, like, period.
Yeah.
And so it is invaluable to just like, to figure out where to start. And I tell people, I get asked if I will take shadows, or people can like, follow me around on set. And I'm always, I decline it. And one of the reasons why is because I don't think it's actually as valuable as you think it is, because you might be there as an observer, but it's so passive, and producing, the only way to learn is to actually be physical. Like, you have to be the person.
And you get better at it.
You get better because you figure it out, and
it's problem solving.
It's problem solving.
You have to just get in and solve the problem.
Yeah. And so unless you're like solving problems, you're not producing.
Right.
So
I
tell people, I'm like, go find a short, like, produce something, go start small. It doesn't have to be a big movie, but like, just start small, and little by little, like, you can like, grow your muscle and learn the craft, and like, let me be your mentor and help answer your questions. But if you try to just like follow me and see what I do and think that you're going to learn producing from that, you won't, because I will be very clear to say, like, first of all, I've been doing this now for like 13 years straight. However, not one job I've ever done has been the same. Not a single one, whether it's the collaborators I'm working with, whether it's the stories that I'm working on, or even if it's just like the problems that I'm solving. Like, I've never have had a challenge that has looked exactly the same. And so like, that's also, I think, why I love it so much, is because I'm like, it's not boring by any means, because I don't feel like I'm doing the same job ever. So within that space, it's like, I think for any aspiring producers out there, you just gotta take the leap. Just do it.
Gotta do it. I feel like I've understood producing when I did a short film in college, when I was first coming out being an actor, and the producer on this film, this small show, it was like, was it for Columbia? I came up in the theater scene in Chicago.
Okay.
So I was in Chicago for many, many years. And I don't even remember, but this just came to me listening to you talk. And I was like, oh, this is when I understood what a producer does, is watching, like we were on set and something fell through, something huge, like our next location fell through or something. And the lead producer, who was like a senior, this was his big thesis statement, he just sat down on the curb. We were shooting outside some house and put his head in his hands and was just like, what am I going to do? And as the actor just sitting off stage waiting for my scene to come up, I was like, oh God, something's really falling apart. Something's bad. Something's really, really bad. And then I watched him just like pick himself up and like pick up his phone and start making phone calls, dialing, making another phone call, dialing, making another. And he was moving. He was walking around.
Yep.
Okay, and I was like, that's producing.
That is producing.
Got it. That's a producer. That's what a producer is. I was like, I think I get that job.
Well, and it's crazy because it's like, yeah, that's someone's job is to worry. And it's someone's job, like, because you realize you're like, well, I can't interrupt my director with this because they're like shooting the scene and the act, you know, like no one else is going to take that on in terms of like, what do we do?
It's such a huge role that, like you said, is sometimes pretty invisible. People don't understand fully what it is and what it entails.
Yeah,
and you learn to be okay with stress.
You know,
well, I mean, I think it gets easier. It's gotten easier for me.
That's why I do CrossFit, ladies. Okay, I was like, the stress has to go somewhere. Actually, no.
I was gonna say, I'm surprised I don't have more gray hairs. Like I have a funny story about that. Where like I once shot a commercial in Austin, Texas.
Okay,
and we had a model like walk down the sidewalk in her underwear. What? And the permit was in process. It was an underwear commercial.
Yeah, sure.
It was an underwear commercial. Yeah. The permit was in process, and I was about to like have it in my hand when some people called the authorities on us, and they were like, "Well, they're not permitted to be there." And I like scrambled to find a private sidewalk. So I called like maybe 50 different.
What's a private sidewalk?
I was just thinking like a sidewalk that belonged to a business.
A sidewalk that belonged to a bar. I didn't even know they existed. But I like through calling around and even like talking to the city, and they were like, "We know a guy. This guy can help you." And then we ended up shooting the commercial on this private sidewalk where no one minded that she was in her underwear. This was a long time ago, and it was a micro budget where, didn't have the resources to get
learned
in time.
a lot.
But I learned a lot. But yeah, it's like, but I feel like, when I was younger and producing, the stress would get to me a lot more. But then the more that you're in stressful situations and the more that you're in these like do or die situations, I don't know, maybe it's just my limbic system where I'm able to stay cool under pressure a lot better because I've had a lot of practice having to.
That's true, because I think baby producers are the ones who freak out the most because you're just like, like
this guy was in college.
Yeah, you're just like, but that's why you got to like just start doing it. I think my favorite thing about the job though is when you watch the end result in whatever it is that you were making, and you're just like, oh God, that came out so well, and you're like, they'll never know. They'll never understand. That scene almost killed me. Almost broke me, right? Like, because that's the beauty in all of it. Yeah. It's like, at the end of the day, you're just doing this for people to resonate and relate to a story and to connect with it in some capacity. But we will drive ourselves crazy in trying to make that reality. And it is stressful. And to me, that is the biggest reward, is always like at the end of the day, seeing the completion and being like, well, guess that hernia was worth it. That was fine.
Like it looks effortless, but it's not.
It's not. But it's like, it's the beauty of what we do, I think. It's like creating art at the end of the day. You're just like, oh, I guess art's not really easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it, I guess.
Yeah.
So
that's true. We love to ask people what they're curious about at the moment.
I think for me, I'm really curious about these vertical dramas, these micro shorts.
I wanted to ask you if you were.
Well, it's just been fascinating to see this explode. And I've like downloaded a few of the apps and I've watched some of these shorts and I'm like, what am I watching?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I mean, again, it reminds me of like early digital days, but I think, how do I shorten this? There's two big things about vertical dramas. Number one, they've obviously kind of found its niche in the soapy drama arena, right? And that's what it's like, what they're growing their audience is based off, their audience is on. And the bigger question that I'm really curious about is like, okay, can you expand this format into other genres? Will it still work in other genres and other niches? That is a TBD thing, because a lot of these companies are now exploring it, but it's not yet transitioned yet, right? And you haven't really seen like a vertical drama just focus on action yet. So so like that's a big question mark. Is like, okay, is this niche? Is this a niche? Is it a fad, or can it actually expand to become another place to watch different types of story and content? Because it's just a different format. That's all it is. The second thing about vertical dramas is the convergence that's happening around just how much money is being spent. And so if you don't know a little bit, vertical dramas were established mainly by Chinese companies before Quibi, RIP. I think Quibi was well ahead of its time, but they also did a lot of things wrong, but we don't have enough time to unpack that. And so, Chinese companies who started these vertical drama micro shorts in China grew exponentially, made billions of dollars, and we're starting to get saturated in the market share. And obviously what comes next is to come to the US and try to break into the US market and to grow an audience here, right? So that way you can eventually start to get more of a global domination like a TikTok. And so you now have a handful of Chinese companies. There's like 3 major ones that are based in Silicon Valley and LA, and they are like very desperately trying to grow into the US market. And they are finding success, right? They are finding success. However, now since they've been here, it's only been about a year and a half. This last year alone, you've had a handful of US-based media companies and money who are now fully investing into the space and are trying to compete and or build or beat the Chinese companies and do it also because in their mind, they're like, well, we know US audience is better. So what that tells you is that this new, I don't know, way of storytelling, it is in its infancy stages, and it is so TBD in terms of its lifespan, but it is in its infancy stages enough. What excites me is that almost anyone can jump in. Right. It's like the Wild Wild West when when YouTube invested $100 million and it was like, well, now what's going to happen? And so I'm looking at that space mainly from that angle of like, now what's going to happen? Because it's still too early to really see when and how this will compete. The last thing I'll leave you with is the most fascinating thing with some vertical dramas is that they might have some success on their apps, but they're finding more success when they take those same stories and putting them on other platforms. And so YouTube Shorts is become YouTube Clips or Shorts, I think is what it's called.
So they've started
TikTok.
to put them on YouTube Shorts.
So like they're using that to build their audience and try to bring people back, but they're also now still finding that their audiences might be growing there and not there. So you just, for me, I sit there and say, okay, is it going to be a standalone thing, or is this just going to be a new format that's wildly adopted by all social media in terms of storytellers and people who want to be creators? We don't know.
I'm so glad you jumped on that because I was so curious when it came up earlier when you started talking about it. I was going to ask you more about it, and then we started getting into something else.
I haven't produced
You're not
one.
the first person that has mentioned that.
Yeah, we talked to a few people on our
and I haven't produced one, but like I said, I've been watching it very intently, and just like gobbling up whatever information that's out there about it. And like I said, I know enough about how they're making them, and I'm like, oh, they're plucking film students out to, and they're making them in 10 days and spending $250,000 on a series, but that's like 60-second episodes. And so you're just like, how does this work?
And the actors, it's almost going back to that contractual model of the 1930s where an actor is contracted to do several soaps at once.
They have a studio contract.
Yeah, so they play like 10 different characters.
Yeah, I'm hearing that's how that works.
Yeah,
that's how they're doing it.
No, it's fascinating. It's time will tell. We'll see. Like I said, if it's here to say, I think it's just going to be an adopted format in general. It's hard to tell, will there be a Netflix of it? Because right now that's what is currently being built, right? So is that infrastructure sustainable? And like I said, I look at even Quibi in some ways, and for all the things they did wrong, one would argue, well, Quibi wasn't sustainable. You know what I mean? You have to have an app that keeps people locked in, and right now those apps do one thing. Whereas TikTok, et cetera, it's more of a creator economy of people uploading whatever they want, right? Same thing with YouTube. And so I don't know. I don't know if it'll work.
Yeah, I'm inclined to say it'll be a creator economy.
Yeah.
Because I Quibi RIP, I worked with them back in the day. And what was not sustainable about them was that they were spending so much money because they were applying the same traditional model. Oh, yeah.
That's why I was like, they were never going to work. Vertical, I remember going and getting this whole dog and pony show, and I was like, that's not gonna work. Someone who started in digital, I was like, you're doing it all wrong. Because you're trying to take Hollywood into that and not embracing what that medium should have been and what it needed to be, which is again opening the door up and opening the gates up for other creators to come into that format and that system, not the other way around. You're trying to force Hollywood into it.
People that natively understand the format coming up versus someone that doesn't understand the format coming in 1,000%. And trying to dictate what
and spending way too much money.
Yeah.
Way too much money.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, this has been delightful.
wonderful.
It's been such a wonderful
Thank you for
conversation.
having me.
Thanks
I've really
for
appreciated this
joining
chat,
us.
ladies.
This
Thank
was
you.
so much,
fantastic.
Denise. Where can we follow you on social media? Where can we find your book?
All the things. Yeah. So on social media, it's just MS Deniese, Deniese, Miss Deniese. And the Producing Playbook has its own Instagram, and you can go to theproducingplaybook.com. And this episode's not dropping now, but if you go and join, I'm starting to do these live sessions once a month. And so I'm doing these like open hours where you join on a Zoom chat with me on a Friday afternoon once a month and just like ask me anything and let's just talk about all things producing. And if you go on the website, you can also sign up for those as well, even if you don't want to pay for the course. But I'm just, out here advocating for producers like myself.
Love it.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
Love that.
Well,
thank you both.
all. Thank you for joining. Thank you all for joining wherever you're watching this. And we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.